Welcome to Detoxicity. By men, about men, for everyone. This is a podcast that's attempting to remix the narrative around masculinity, and I thank you for listening and supporting. If you're new to the podcast, I hope you check out the archive, which contains over 150 episodes. I'm always happy when someone reaches out with a friendly word or constructive criticism, so never hesitate to hit me up either via IG at DetoxPodGuy or via email, detoxpod@gmail.com. You can also contact me if you're interested in being a guest on the show or if you know someone who might be a good guest for the show. There's also a Detoxicity Patreon. Patrons get episodes 1 week early, plus I will mail you a cool DetoxPod fridge magnet. Go to bit.ly/DetoxPodPlus to find out more. Oh, one more thing. Late last year, I completed my certification courses, and I am now a life and relationship coach. I'm taking clients. Go to mike-joseph.com and book a free consultation. Thanks for listening. I really do appreciate you. If you're a regular listener of this pod, you might recognize the names Luke Wesley and Mark Marshall. Benjamin Wagner, too. Well, this episode contains an interview with the guy that introduced me to most of those people, Bryan Dunn. He keeps good company, obviously, and he's a musician that is currently based in upstate New York, although we met a few years ago while he was living in Brooklyn. Our discussion jumps around quite a bit and covers a lot of ground. We talk about the somewhat nomadic experience that can result from a military upbringing and how it can increase your worldview to become more accepting of diversity, or at least a diverse array of opinions and people. We talk about opting out of New York City and how jumping out of the lion's den that is the music scene here has given him a sense of calm. We talk about how transactional relationships can be when you are an entertainer or you work in the arts. We talk about aging and taking care of yourself, and we also talk about a challenge a lot of us guys face, which is how to call other dudes out for shitty behavior. I'd like to think that these episodes sound to you less like interviews and more like you're listening in on two friends talking. This one actually is two friends talking, so allow me to introduce to you my friend, Bryan Dunn.
All right, my name is Bryan Dunn. I'm a singer-songwriter currently living in the small hamlet of Olive Bridge, upstate in New York. Before that, I was in Brooklyn for a long time. Before that, I was in Austin, and before that, a variety of other places as I was an Army brat. So that's me and what I do. I'm also a software engineer that pays the bills, and I don't want to say that sums me up. I like to think I a little more complicated than that, but that's the
You are.
basics.
Yeah, so this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that we're kind of going without a script. I usually have a few notes from about my guests before we start talking, so I have sort of a base. But then again, I also am friends with you, so I shouldn't really need notes in the first place.
Right. Should just be a regular conversation that other
Yeah.
people get to listen to if they choose.
Yes, agreed. And the other interesting thing is, like I said right before I hit record, I've interviewed like a half dozen people that know you, and I've interviewed multiple people that I've met through you.
Very true. So it's
So,
it's finally my turn to come under the what's a good term for it? Like it's not scrutiny, but it is bearing my soul to Father Mike on the Detoxicity
oh
podcast.
God,
And
Father
I was raised Catholic, so that's probably going to come up a couple more times in the conversation. But
Mike.
putting that,
As technically a member of the clergy,
oh yes,
I guess that shouldn't make me feel weird, but it does.
I took it to a weird place right off the bat. I'm sorry.
It's okay. No. Let's go to all the weird places. So I've spoken to a handful of people on the show previously who would describe themselves as military brats. And what I gather is that it's different for everybody that experiences it. But the one kind of solid understanding that I have gotten from story to story is that it takes you out of the country at some point.
Yes, it does. In my case, it was twice. My brother and I were born on a naval base in Alameda, California, when my dad was doing some sort of exchange program, as he's technically Army. Then we moved from there and spent 3 years in Great Britain, then back to the States to Georgia, then across the pond again to Germany. Spent 4 years in Germany, and then my dad's final post was in Texas as part of the Army Air Force Exchange Service, which is headquartered in Dallas. So that's where I went to high school. Yeah, so a bit of back and forth. Great Britain, I don't have too many memories of, although I do have some. Germany, I remember very well.
And is Brooklyn the longest you've actually lived in one place
Oh, by
consecutively?
far. By far. Even when I was in Austin for college, that was, 4 years, and then I did a day job for a bit in Dallas, and then I went back to Austin for a couple more years, but continuously in one place. Nowhere prior to that came close. Sort of. So in a lot of ways, Brooklyn will always be a home for me. But at the same time, the grass growing under your feet after a certain point, you want to change. So
Right.
here I am in the
And,
middle of nowhere.
and you've been in the middle of nowhere for like a little over 18 months now.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's
it's a nice little place. I feel like if I were you, I would be maybe a little bored.
I think I worried about that prior to coming here, but since we've been here, it hasn't been the case at all. First off, there's always stuff to do around the house if you want to occupy yourself in terms of home ownership, which is exciting and new, but at least I don't have to wait for a landlord who, frankly, my last couple of landlords were not great about doing things that need to be done. And at least this way, if I have anyone to blame, it's myself. So that's a choice in a new and exciting way. But also, socially, there's a fair amount going on up here. We're only 20 or so minutes from Woodstock, 20 or so minutes from Ackerd and Kingston, and there's a lot of little places coming up. And we keep running into people that we knew in the city that have made this similar move. So surprisingly, the social life has changed somewhat, but it's still fairly active, and there's still plenty of places to play music. And the adjustment that we've made since we've been here mentally in terms of how we're living now, it's like it's a good time to stop. Right now, you have no choice but to stay at the house. And assuming you did a little prep in advance, you're going to be fine. So I practiced a lot. I've read a book. Just give yourself the time to be still, which I think was a much bigger problem for me back in the city. Because as you know, there's usually something you could be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Especially as a musician, there's always people playing if you're not playing yourself. And things that you would like to go do. And sometimes that wanting to go and support your friends or see things that excite you and inspire you can put an additional pressure on yourself so that it becomes a sense of obligation. Even though you might enjoy doing it, if you feel obligated to do it, it takes some of the joy away from it. And here, we're far enough away from basically anything that if we go to something, we're making a commitment to do it, and we want to be there. And again, this is something that I've changed my thought process about since being here. That like if we want to go do something, we're going to want to go do it, and if we don't, we don't.
Right.
So that's, again, I think social pressure in the city exerts a weight that sometimes you're not even fully aware of. At least I wasn't until we decided to leave. And we're still close enough that we can take a day trip to the city or a weekend trip to the city without worrying about it too much. Or the reverse is true, as you've been up here.
Yes.
So we still have the options, but hopefully we can enjoy it more. because it's something that we're choosing to do, and be a little more present in the moment while we are there.
Right. You bring up an interesting point, or I should say, a couple of interesting points regarding the social obligations of many New Yorkers, particularly those who either are creative people or know creative people. You know, your social obligations as a New Yorker and my social obligations as a New Yorker were probably a bit different because you are a musician and I am not. I'm adjacent and you are directly in it.
Right.
But I mean, one, it's got to be kind of a relief to be like, well, shit, it's a Saturday night or a Friday night, and I don't have to go to this show, or I don't have to make the Sophie's choice between going to this friend's show or this friend's show. Particularly as you get older, I feel like the obligation behind that becomes a bit more of something that you might resent.
I think that's definitely part of it. And I think you and I, as you were saying earlier, you're musician adjacent, but I think there's a fair amount of overlap there, as we run in a lot of the same circles now.
Right.
And even up here, I've had friends that I've made in the Woodstock area that have texted about shows and this, that, and the other. And sometimes you can't escape a certain amount of social pressure to go to some sort of function. But I do feel like that's lessened a great deal. And even in those cases, as I get older, I'm more okay with saying, I don't need to do this. If it's not something I'm going to genuinely enjoy, even if it's something that could be good for me career-wise or what have you in the long term, in terms of networking and all that, the hustle aspect of it.
Right.
Like if I want to go to a show, I want to go see a show that I'm personally going to get something out of the show, not because I know someone's going to be there, or I should be seen at the show or anything like that. And I think I had that for a while, maybe too long in the city, especially in my 30s, that there was some sort of, again, self-imposed social pressure.
Was it really self-imposed, or was it kind of like passively aggressively imposed by others, or was it maybe a combination? Because I'm not as close to it as you are, but I've had friends who, when they're playing a show, it's kind of like wink wink nudge nudge, I hope to see you there. And maybe it's a personality thing on my end, but I feel that pressure.
No, that's definitely part of it. There is outside pressure, but I also feel like, for some of the reasons I just mentioned, I'm putting additional pressure on myself, because if I don't go, maybe I would have missed out on some additional opportunity that I don't even know about. And that's, again, you don't want to let your friends down, which is true regardless of what area of practice, or
Yeah.
it's as simple as that sometimes. But if you're trying to pursue a creative career, especially in a city like New York or Los Angeles, or you're going to put additional pressure on yourself to make those events and try to make something of them.
Right.
I mean, the whole reason for moving to New York in the first place for me was I was with my band in Austin, and we'd done relatively well there. And some of the members decided, well, Austin only gets you so far. We need to be in one of the big music cities. And the only places are New York, Los Angeles, and Nashville. It's like other scenes have great regional scenes. Seattle clearly comes to mind. But those scenes have their moments, and then they ebb and flow. The businesses are still in New York, Nashville, and Los Angeles. So a lot of people, myself included, moved in. It's like, well, let's see how far we can take it. Let's measure yourself up against the best, because a lot of the best musicians in the world come through those three cities.
Yeah.
And Mark Marshall talked about it a bit in your conversation with him about that perception that it's either feast or famine, which is a lie in general. There's hundreds of ways to make a living doing music that aren't being Taylor Swift. But in a lot of people's perception, you're either starving in the van or you're playing stadiums.
Right.
And then my move to New York was definitely like I'm going to try to get to the playing stadiums aspect or size of things. And spoiler alert, it did not work out. But I've never regretted it. Although, because that was sort of the end goal, at least in mind, you put that additional pressure on yourself to hustle and network at any creative event to see if the next thing for you is right around the corner.
Right. That's a good segue into a question that I think I've fully formulated now. But at what point were you cool with being like, okay, this is where I'm at? I mean, Taylor Swift, I don't know if she'd been invented yet.
She had not been invented yet. This is a while ago.
But at what point were you like, okay, this is what I do and I'm cool with it? I'm presuming that you are at that point.
Oh yeah, and I've been at that point for some time, and I think well before I left the city. But it did take doing some readjusting of my own expectations. I don't know that there was a single switch to it. I think maybe the last full length CD that I put the funding together and released and put out and tried to get a PR campaign behind it and did everything that you're supposed to do in the business to try to get it out there. And it was, I don't want to say it was a wet thud, because the people that heard it liked it. And, it didn't score me the big record deal. It didn't score me thousands or millions of streams on Spotify or what have you. But I put it out and I'm proud of it. And I'm still proud of it. And if it didn't go anywhere, well, I've made my peace with it. I still created something that I know was good. And I still hear from random people occasionally that, oh, I really loved this song on the record, or I really liked your record, or I made a friend up here who I'd never met in the city, but we ran in a lot of the same circles. At one point, we were in two projects that shared the same drummer, but we'd never connected even, and we were both in Greenpoint for at least a decade overlapping. And now we hadn't met until we were up here at this small roadside bar. And it's like, wait, you must know this person and this person and this person. Which again is the kind of thing that happens up here way more than I expected to. And it's made the transition much easier than I think I was even expecting. But, I gave him a copy of it and I heard nothing for a while, which, having an artist mentality sometimes means, oh, shit, he must have hated it.
Right.
But then he put it in and he's like, this is great. I really enjoy it. It's like, yeah, it is good. And I'm glad you agree with that. So I think that shift of, even if nobody hears it on a grand scale, I put my heart and soul into this record and I know it's good, which is definitely a change for me, because I'd released a bunch of stuff before, but I was never as happy with it. And I always had those brass ring expectations in the back of my mind. So anytime nothing big came of it, it felt like a blow. But with that last one, I'm like, no, I'm doing good things. And if this is my niche in the New York independent music scene, I'm good with that. We'll see where it goes next. I'm not equipped to stop making music. That's not something that's ever going to happen, barring injury or death.
Let's knock wood and hope that those don't happen.
Yes.
Well, injury doesn't happen at all. Death doesn't happen for a long time.
No, I did sprain my thumb over the weekend. So.
Boo. I mean, see, that's homeowner shit. When the landlord has to do all that stuff, you don't have to worry about getting injured.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. My last landlord didn't even do it himself. He had some random guy that we called the Viking behind his back because he was like 6'7" and just a massively built man that would show up randomly. And I think he only spoke Polish, but I'm the Viking now.
Now it's your job.
And again, that's something that I'm okay with because it's a new kind of responsibility for myself that I'm finding I enjoy.
Right. I wonder with the being, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, being unrooted so much, it must feel really good to be like, all right. And we've had conversations about that maybe not being permanent, but it must feel good to be like, I have a space that I own. I'm putting roots down for however long, and I'm not jumping from place to place to place to place.
Yeah, we had no intentions of being in that small apartment as long as we were. And it's the norm to, even within the city, move every couple of years, unless you get a really great deal, which we had, and then try to hold on to it as long as you can. But even that doesn't necessarily feel like roots. This does. And in a way, because of that, it feels like the first time I've had that. Like, my parents' house was always a place to go back to, but even they moved several times after I left for college. They were in DC for a while, and now they're back in Texas close to my brother and his family, and I think that's where they're going to stay. But I'm kind of planting my flag here and seeing how it goes forth. And that is, again, a different mindset than constantly being aware that your landlord would like you to leave because he can get more money.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, I don't think we could afford to go back to our old neighborhood. That's the economics of the city.
Yeah.
Especially since my wife was there since 2002 and I moved in with her 2005 or 2006. And since then, they're throwing up new towers on the waterfront practically every 6 months or so. So, I mean, I'm not here to talk about gentrification necessarily. But it is a fact of life in New York City.
Yeah. And I wonder if maybe subconsciously or consciously, I don't know, planting that flag was something that was important to you.
I think so. At this point in my life, I was ready for it. Like, being somewhat rootless growing up, I think is great in a lot of ways. And it gets you used to change just because change is going to come.
Mm-hmm.
Like every 3 years, you're not going to be in the same post anymore.
Right.
And I'm very lucky in that I got to see a lot more of the world than a lot of people my age by the time I hit high school. I went to high school in Texas, and Texas is, this may come as a surprise, fairly conservative.
Get out!
And many people hadn't left their hometown. Many people hadn't left the state. And at the same time, by the same age, I'd been to most of Europe. And it always struck me as that I was fortunate to have been through all that and seen what I'd seen and gained that perspective. And it's not that it bothered me that there were people that hadn't left Texas. It's the people that had no plans to that immediately rubbed me the wrong way, because I'm like, you have no ambition to see anything outside the world that you're familiar with. And that tends to lead to the kind of mindset that Texas is now unfortunately famous for.
Yeah.
The rest of the country, that's intractable and this is the way things should be. And it's not everybody in Texas, but it was present even when I was in high school and college, even in the more liberal parts of Texas, that just being closed to the idea of change and difference is toxic, for lack of a better word. And this is a podcast about trying to remove some of that from the conversation.
In Bryan.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to bring it around to the heart and soul of the thing.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that mindset, right? That very provincial. This is where I'm from, and I'm never leaving here, and everything is like this. And I do think that, speaking from personal experience, being able to see the way that different people live has given me a level of insight that makes me a more empathetic person, makes it both easier and more difficult to get along with people, depending on who those people are.
Right.
I mean, I'm not as well traveled as you, but I've seen enough of this country, and also just by virtue of being multiple minorities, kind of have to live in multiple worlds and juggle different perspectives.
Oh, yeah.
But was the perspective that you had and that the other people didn't, was that something you could articulate in high school, or is that something you've realized kind of in retrospect?
No, I think I could articulate it in high school, just because at that point I was aware that I was going to be considerably more on the left side of the political spectrum than most of the people I had met. I think that starts with empathy. It starts with being able to understand other people's situations and role in the world, and think, well, maybe the system that has benefited me isn't doing a great job for everybody out there.
Right.
And it's not like at that point I was a political radical or a revolutionary or anything. I was just one of the few people on the left side of the class in government in high school. And everyone was like, I thought you were smart. I'm like, I am. Yeah. I have since had people from that particular class who was like, oh, you were right about all of this shit. And I'm like, yeah, thanks for joining the party 20 years too late.
I mean, better late than never, as they say.
That's true.
Yeah. I was wondering if you got shit when you were a kid. Yeah.
I got a bit of a hard time maybe, but nothing like the openly gay kid in my high school. I know there are others, but he was the one that was stereotypically presenting himself, and that made him a target. It's like none of my experiences have taken me anywhere close to where yours have in terms of dealing with shit.
Right.
Like I was saying, I've grown up in a system largely designed to support me, people that are just like me. And I'm well aware of that. So just being politically left in Texas is not necessarily, or at least when I was in high school was not necessarily enough by itself to get you rocks thrown at. I
Right.
did get a trash can thrown at me when Clinton was elected
Are you
because,
serious?
yeah, yeah, that happened.
And what
Because
came
I was
out
the
of
only
that?
politically left person this person knew. Like I don't even know what he was trying to do at the time. It just anyway.
My goodness. You know, you bring up the gay kid as an example, and look, I went to high school in New York City, in Brooklyn, in a high school that was probably significantly more populated than yours was. I'm making an assumption here, but
We had a pretty big.
okay, my graduating class was like 1,200 kids.
You win. Mine
But
was 600, but
okay, but my point in that is that even in Brooklyn, New York, in a class that was twice the size of yours, we had one gay kid. And like you said, wasn't just one gay kid because I was a gay kid. I wasn't out to even myself at that point. And I'm sure that at a conservative estimate is that there are 100 other kids in that class who came out queer. Very conservative estimate. But it was also kind of a sign of the times. And we're basically the same age, a sign of the times that people just didn't come out then. It
mhm,
wasn't safe for anybody, anywhere.
yeah,
I mean, it's probably more so in Texas and more so in New York, but significantly more so in New York than it is in Texas. So I use that as an example to show like how far we have come. And if there's anybody younger listening to two 40-something-year-old guys talking, yeah,
our day.
yeah. But one's perspective on what things were really like back then, that's real. You know?
Yeah, it is, and thank you for that. It is nice to sort of take stock that things have changed, largely in a lot of ways positive. Not
Yeah.
all things,
Not
but
all
there
things.
has been a lot of wonderful things that have happened since we went through our respective high school experiences.
Yeah, progress doesn't always come as speedily as we would like it to, but it does come. I have faith in that. But speaking about our respective ages, what are you doing to take care of yourself, Brian? I know that we privately had discussions about this stuff, but I feel like there really is a lot to unpack when it comes to being a middle aged guy and self care and thinking about mortality. It could go down a whole like falling dominoes row of topics in relation to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as I think I mentioned briefly, I have been aware of my own impending mortality more recently, and everybody knows objectively that they're going to die after a certain point. You're aware of death as a fact of life. But being aware of that and actually coming to grips with it are two different things to some extent. So I've been working on exercise and diet, exercise, but also just trying to get to a point where it's a cliche. The whole live each day as if it were your last thing. I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think it's realistic. But when you are aware that, you know, everything comes to an end, what are you going to do with the time that you have?
Mm-hmm.
Because my first real love passed away a couple of years ago. And I'm still very lucky in that I have both my parents and everyone's in good health. And if that's the length of life I have to look forward to, I'd be extremely fortunate. I'd be all right
Mm-hmm.
with that. But there's an end coming sooner or later. And I'm seeing more friends have to deal with the fallout from parents dying or spouses dying or that kind of thing, that it's been on my mind lately. And I don't know that I've come to terms with it. And I'm certainly not looking at anything impending that would make me think that it's imminent.
It's good
But
to
I
know.
think, yeah, but I think that's also a part of the mindset of being up here and planting your flag, as you were putting it before. This is where the roots are. This is where I will build the last thing, maybe, if it comes to that.
I mean, does it have
It,
to be the last thing?
it doesn't. I don't even know where I'm going with this, but
Because the last thing could be 40, 50 years from now.
it's true. It's true. And a lot of things change in between now and then. So,
Right.
but it is something that I think I've been approaching mentally in a different way. And not because of leaving the city, just because we're getting older and
Right.
these things are going to become more common, regardless of how we feel about it. So, yeah, all you can control is where you are at mentally and physically as best you can, and do the things that you need to do to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Because like listening to your conversation with Luke Wesley,
Which one?
about the second one, the more grief oriented one. I
Yeah.
guess they were both. He was both, and Luke is a beautiful man and has been a good friend of mine for a long time.
I am very thankful to you for introducing the two of us.
Well, I know he feels the same way. But listening to him go through that process and knowing that is coming for all of us. There will be things that you lose. There will be things that you grieve. So all you can do is control what you've got in the moment as best you can, and then deal with things as they come.
Right. It's a reality that we all have to deal with, and I think it does become more present for a lot of people as we age. The idea of living every day as if it were your last day, like you said, that ain't sustainable. Because if I knew it was going to be my last day on Earth, I would have a laundry list of things to do in a real fucking hurry. But I think
One of them a real hurry fucking.
yes, that too.
Like
Yes,
that's isn't that the thing most people automatically react to in a
yeah.
life or death situation? I wish I'd gotten laid one more time.
One more time. But I think the mature, like a smart way to look at it, because I'm sure there are multiple smart ways to look at it, is like, look, we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, right? We're not adding days, we're subtracting days. So make sure that you are doing your best to live your life as ethically and honestly and what's the stupid buzzword, authentically as possible. And just kind of be aware of the fact that you may not necessarily get a chance to tell somebody the thing that you want to tell them or treat the person the way that you want to treat them or do the thing that you want to do. So
Yeah.
don't procrastinate, don't waste time, because no one really knows how much time they have.
Exactly. I didn't think of it until just now in the conversation while we're talking. And it struck me as kind of funny and also kind of cliche. The Thoreau quote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately." I think I might have done that. Maybe not consciously, but on some level, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately.
I'm processing that in my head. And there's value in that. And I think about that too, where I'm like, okay, to say it another way, the great Gil Scott Heron wrote a song, one of his last songs called New York City's Killing Me.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that, I mean, this is just me and you talking, but as I get older, I long for more simplicity than this city might offer me.
Yeah. And I don't know that it's even simplicity, Mike. As much as it is the ability to focus on something.
Okay.
I mean, maybe that's not the right way to rephrase it. Maybe I'm just saying that's simplicity. Uh,
The ability maybe to deliberately and thoughtfully focus on something.
yeah. Because, yeah, I guess your focus kind of has to narrow as you get older. I mean, it doesn't have to. Nobody has to do anything.
Anything, right?
However, your life lives best for you, as long as you're not a complete asshole to other people you come
As long as
across.
you're not hurting others.
Right. Which is, easier said than done,
Mm-hmm.
even with the best intentions in the world. But at least for me, I think I hadn't articulated it until now, and now I feel like maybe I'm more of a cliche than I fully realized I was. But it's working for me, so if it's working, don't fix it. Or, yeah.
If it ain't
If it
broken,
ain't
don't
broke,
fix
don't
it.
fix it. If it's
Yes.
working, don't fix it. Same, ultimately.
Yes. When we last saw each other, no, it wasn't when we last saw each other in person, because when we last saw each other in person, we went to that Mexican place.
Yeah.
When I last visited you, we were talking about you seeking a therapist. Has that happened?
It has not happened. I'm still.
Do I need to come back up there?
I mean, I would like that.
Yes, and.
Yes, and I still need the therapist. I'm still open to the idea. I know it's done great things for a lot of people that I know, but it's like the dentist, which we were talking about earlier. My options are fewer, although I guess you can do therapy online in a way that you can't do dentistry online.
If only Bryan Dunn. Good God.
The world's first online dentist would be well, you're going to have to take this hook and put it in your mouth.
Ay, ay, ay. I mean, to be fair, this may not be the case for everybody. My therapy experience has been much more fruitful and much less physically painful than any dentistry experience I've ever had.
I had been to one therapist back when I was still in Austin, and it was not a positive experience for me. And I don't want to say it's tainted my view toward the profession, because it hasn't. Any number of people I know have had wonderful experiences from it, and I don't doubt that I could benefit from it myself, but it hasn't been on the radar. Probably because I'm a little cheap and we've had all these housing costs to deal with. Which is not to say I shouldn't prioritize my mental health, because I absolutely should.
You have
Especially
health
after.
insurance, Bryan.
Yeah, I know. And I had a little bit of like a secondhand meltdown. I'm not even sure what that was about, which is why I've stopped drinking, at least for the moment.
Okay.
It's fuzzy, and it's the kind of thing that made me wake up the next morning and say, yeah, I need to address this. I need to at least have a regular thing where I can talk about issues without fear of judgment or consequence, which, I'm very lucky in my choice of friends. I am very lucky in my choice of spouse. I can talk to most of these people about most things, but every once in a while there's a thought that gets stuck in the back of your head that you can't express to those people without fear of damaging those relationships.
Sure.
And that's what therapy is great for.
It is, and I'm not going to do too much evangelizing here, but friends and spouses are not impartial third parties.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest value, one of the biggest values that I've personally gotten from therapy, is the fact that this person probably isn't going to make some shit up or bypass something or gloss over something because they're personally invested in you. You're paying them to tell you the truth as
Right.
they see it. So they can offer up, and they should offer up, very impartial renderings of whatever situations you bring to them. And I think that's super helpful.
Oh, without question.
So
And I'm sure I would benefit from it. And I will. You may need to ride my case a little more about it, but I will start looking into it.
I'm very happy to do that. As you bring up relationships, because you are a musician and lived in New York City and were part of this musicians community for so long, I'm wondering, having stepped away, how some of those relationships have changed.
Well, I mean that is something that I've given a lot of thought to, in part because, like it or not, a lot of those friendships are fairly cursory and based on running into each other in the same spots over and over and over again.
Right.
And in general, the follow up questions are the same. It's like, oh, what have you been working on? When's your next show? Anything exciting coming down the pipe? Which is standard scene networking fare. And now that I'm not running around to the same places 6 days a week, I'm not seeing a whole lot of those people. So, I mean, I'm not surprised that some of those were amiable acquaintanceships that pass away with geography. That's not unusual, regardless of your vocation or not. But there are a few friendships that it's more complicated to deal with now that you're a couple of hours away. And especially being a musician, I was never one to date within, well, not too much anyway. Within I was younger. There were a couple of indiscretions. But the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing, it is a myth perpetuated to some extent, but a lot of people also associate that with the benefits of being in a music scene.
Mm-hmm.
And when those three things get involved, people get hurt. And having some distance from that now, I can see that there are definitely some friends that I should have been more trying to figure out the right word for it. Like, not assertive with, but been a little more upfront with about how their actions were affecting other people.
Mm.
Because that's something that's been on my mind recently with a couple of people that I know that I still consider myself close to, but have also wreaked some havoc with other relationships with people that I'm close to. And I'm like, am I still friends with this person because I'm setting a good example? Am I still friends with this person because I care about them? Am I still friends with this person because I don't want to deal with confrontation? When something like that happens, what is my responsibility to both parties involved? Like, the easy path is saying it's got nothing to do with me, but sometimes there's a clear right and a clear wrong, and you need to tell people, if you want them to get better, you fucked up here. It's like, take your lumps, deal with the consequences. Sometimes it's going to cost you friendship. Sometimes it's going to cost you gigs. And sometimes you had it coming because you weren't valuing those relationships the same way that they were.
Weirdly, the first thing I immediately think of is Ryan Adams. Yeah.
Perfect example.
Right. But there's so much nuance involved in situations like that. And like, there's a few questions there, right? The first question is, do I confront this person about their behavior? The second question is, if I confront this person about their behavior, do I remain friends with this person or do I walk away from this relationship? And those are super complicated questions.
Yeah, regardless. And then there's also, in the case of Ryan Adams and some other similar artists that you and I have discussed in the past, how does that change your relationship with their art? Because not that I know Ryan Adams personally, but I haven't really listened to him since all of that came out.
It's been hard.
Yeah, but at the same time, I still listen to Bowie, and Bowie did some stuff that was unquestionably wrong in the 70s.
Right.
And there's a part of, I guess that's not really relevant in interpersonal relationships, like even with people that I know, except the part that sometimes bugs me is like if I feel validation from this person because I respect their art and they do something personal that I think is flat out wrong. Is my own ego complicating that question in a way that it wouldn't with somebody else, where it was just like, well, no, I'm writing that person off completely.
Right. It's a different circumstance when it's Ryan Adams or Kanye West or whoever it is,
Right.
versus like your homeboy. The musicians or popular artists or anyone who creates art that you appreciate but you don't know personally is still somewhat an abstract concept.
Right.
It is much easier to divorce whoever those people are as human beings, which none of us really know because we're not sitting down having meals with these people or inviting them over to our houses or working with them, from the art that they make. It's a different situation when your friend, your associate, your uncle, your wife, your mother-in-law, your whoever is the perpetuator of the bad behavior.
All right.
Because not only is it, I think, a more direct personal interaction, a more direct personal relationship, but there's also the chance that you're going to keep seeing these people over and over and over again,
Yeah.
and having to face these uncomfortable situations on numerous occasions.
Yeah, it's tough because sometimes you, and again, this may be the Catholic in me wanting to internalize some of the responsibility for that. I had a good friend in high school and college, and after he graduated, he taught middle school in Texas. And I moved here, and then a few years after I moved here, I found out he was arraigned on the one thing that you really don't want your friend who's a middle school teacher in Texas
Oh
to be
boy.
arraigned on.
Okay.
So he asked me to be a character witness on that particular trial. And it wasn't anyone he was teaching, it was a student who had gone on to high school at least, who was coming back and saying, because he always had a close relationships with his students, and they would keep in touch after they moved on. And you're standing on the outside, it's like, is this sweet? Is it weird? I'm not in the profession. I don't know where to draw those lines.
Right.
So he was brought up on charges for that and asked me to witness for him. And because I'd never seen anything that I would deem inappropriate. He cared about his students. I saw him dress up as Mark Twain for an English class. He liked to be the cool teacher, which is time and time, it seems, becoming an excuse for other things. But
Right.
and he flat out told me nothing happened. And so I put my butt on the line for him. And he was convicted. And even when he was in jail, I was writing to him. And he told me he would tell me what happened eventually. Years and years went by. He's like, yeah, I'll tell you everything. So finally he gets out and he calls me. And basically his first admission is he did it.
I was
which,
really hoping that that ended differently.
yeah, me too, as it turned out.
Mm.
Because I'm like, oh, because it seemed to be heading that direction in some of his letters back and forth. And he found Jesus, as so many people
Oh
do,
boy.
behind bars, which gave him license to be judgy about me in certain circumstances, which I was like, are we really doing this now?
Right.
But since that happened, I've definitely carried around the sense of, what if I'm wrong again about things like that? Which has made it difficult to come to grips with, I think, smaller hurts, even though those smaller hurts are no less painful or awful for the people going through it. Because I chose to stand by someone I thought that I knew and I thought was a friend, and I thought I could trust that person.
Right.
And I was wrong.
That's a hard situation. It's a hard dilemma because you never want to support someone who is evil.
Yeah. But at the same time, you want there to be the possibility for forgiveness, for
Right.
grace, for that
Right.
person to actually improve and not just say they have.
Right. And that's the
Like,
other thing, right? We talk about things like prison. It's supposed to be
mhm,
remedial, right? It isn't really, but it's supposed to be remedial, and the people are supposed to serve their time and then come out, and theoretically the slate is then wiped clean.
right,
I don't think that ever really happens, but we have to allow each other a certain amount of grace as humans to make mistakes and to grow from them and learn from them and become better people. God knows I've done some shit in my past that I very distinctly regret, and I'd like to think that I have grown and become a better person in light of those things. But it's kind of like I was going to compare to I had a coworker who was dating another coworker many years ago, and it was a opposite sex couple, and I get a call in the middle of the night, and this girl is calling me saying this dude beat the shit out of her. And even in a 25 years ago less woke version of me, I was like, okay, well, A, we need to find this dude and beat the shit out of him. B, there's no coming back from that. Flash forward to like a year or two later, they had long since broken up, but they had a kid together. He passed away from COVID, and it turns out that him and this girl, because they had a child together, had mended fences and were still friends. And even her family, who knew about it and were ready to beat his ass at the time that that situation happened, had a cordial relationship with him later on in life.
right,
So I'm not really sure what my point is. I think everybody has the capacity to do better if they own their shit and sincerely apologize and try to make good. But I'm certainly skeptical about how many people actually do own up and try to make good.
right. And again, it's a process. Like so many other things in life come into that point where you can take ownership of the bad shit as well as the good stuff, because it's easy to pat yourself on the back when you do something good.
Right.
I think it's a lot harder and not even acknowledging the bad things that you've done, but sometimes just acknowledging where you could have done better, where you could have, maybe if you'd just been a little more situationally aware. I don't know that there's anything I could have done for my friend,
Right.
but we were friends in high school and college, and I'd seen him do a bunch of stupid shit that I didn't call him out on because I was probably doing similar stupid shit at the time.
Right. Right.
And you don't necessarily think, oh, this is a pattern that's leading somewhere. But at the same time, should I have said something at some point when he got his first meeting with the principal that said maybe you should draw harder boundaries with your student? Should I have backed that up and said, yeah, maybe you should draw harder boundaries with the students? I'm glad you're their favorite teacher, but you're not their therapist. You're not their friend. Whenever they're looking for something more, but at the same time, sometimes a teacher is all a kid
Some kids
has.
have. Right. And the unfortunate thing is that some teachers take advantage of that.
Yeah. And I don't know all the facts around what happened. I didn't want to after a certain point because that conversation which I had with him, which was my last conversation with him, it didn't seem like he was taking ownership or was interested in apologizing to that. He was just frustrated by how the post prison sex offender laws were going to affect him. It's like, I understand that that's frustrating for you, and I'm sure a lot of that shit isn't fair because the prison system definitely needs work. I don't
Right.
think that's a particularly controversial thing to say.
No.
But you're still focused on the consequences to you when you just admitted in conversation that you've been lying to me for years.
Right. Right. And there's also a third person that has been victimized, like legitimately
Oh,
victimized.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no talk of. I don't know that there's anything he could or should
No.
do with that. But you're having a conversation with one of the last few people on this earth who knew you before this happened and was trying to maintain a relationship with you, and you're still only interested in the consequences to yourself. And at that point, after everything, I was out because there's nothing else you can do when somebody isn't even interested in looking at that thing head on.
Yeah,
They
that
become they become a Christian to point out the splinter in your eye rather than the log in theirs.
right. Right. Yeah, that feels like a good time to be like, okay, we're gonna cut this relationship loose.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
and
sounds like
what
you gave him the benefit of the doubt way too often.
I did, and that's why the music scene stuff is messy and complicated, and occasionally hurtful and mean, but nothing on that scale. But I'm still dealing with the question of how do you handle those situations when you're not the aggrieved party and you're not the person causing the hurt. What's your role in the situation? Short of just going nuclear with those friendships, just cutting that person out of your life, can you do anything to help that person? I don't know that I can. I am not sure, and I've definitely stopped trying for some people. But at the same time, like I,
It's a hard question to answer, man.
yeah,
And that's something that you got to look at on a case by case basis. In the poly community, people talk a lot about restorative justice, which on its face is a valuable concept, I think, because it means you're not throwing the baby and the bathwater out. It means that there is a way back. Do I think that that actually works that way? A lot of times, no. But I think there's always a way back, or there always can be a way back. It's just a matter of how much the offender is willing to work their way back. And
right,
from there, it's just a matter of, I think, using your judgment.
yeah. It's messy,
Life is
and
messy.
life is messy.
Yeah,
Friendships are messy,
yeah,
and all you can do is try to support the people you care about in whatever way that you think you can do that best, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Thank you, Bryan, for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and talk to me. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm glad that you allowed this conversation to be recorded. Bryan and I have had many great conversations, but the opportunity to share this one with you all is an opportunity that I could not pass up. So again, thanks, Bryan. If you would like to know more about Bryan, you can stream his music on whatever streaming service you are a fan of. You can also pick up his music on Bandcamp. And if you are an Instagram person, which I would imagine many of you are, you can follow him at Bryan Dunn Music. That is BryanDunn Music. And just as an FYI, there are multiple Bryan Dunns that are musicians. Strangely enough, there is also a BryanDunne. That is not the Bryan Dunn that just got interviewed. It is BryanDunn. So just to put a little extra clarification on top of that. Thanks again, Bryan. Thank you for listening to Detoxicity. I hope you found this particular episode interesting. And if you are new, I hope you go back and listen to all of the older episodes. Once again, my name is Mike Joseph. I am the host and producer of this show. And there are a lot of things that you can do to continue to support our mission, continue to support this podcast. Follow me on social media. I am on Instagram, Twitter, and I'm on TikTok as DetoxPod Guy. You can also send me an email if you'd like. I'm at detoxpod@gmail.com. I am always on the hunt for people with interesting, inspirational, and powerful stories. So if you know somebody who fits that bill, or if you yourself fit that bill, please don't hesitate to drop me a line via email or via social media. Please make sure you subscribe on your podcast platform that you're listening to this on. Rate, comment, help a brother out, help us move up in the rankings. Follow me on social media, like I said. Follow our Patreon, or subscribe to my Patreon, actually. Patreon.com/detoxicitypod. You get access to exclusive episodes. You get episodes a little earlier than the general public. You get a cool-ass sticker. Lots of stuff. Once again, patreon.com/detoxicitypod. Quick shout out to Calvin Williams for providing the music and doing his magic on the logo, which was originally designed by Jacob Block. I thank you all for listening. I wish you all the best. Please take care of each other. Till next time, peace.